William suddenly finds himself standing on a deserted road in the middle of the night. He looks around in confusion, his heart pounding, until he spots his adoptive mother, Amelia, emerging from the shadows. He greets her, but something about her seems deeply unsettling. In an instant, William is tied to a chair. Amelia grips the rope tightly, preventing him from breaking free, her face twisted in a wild expression as she whispers for him not to be afraid. Terrified, William pleads with her to let him go, but she remains unresponsive to his desperate requests. Suddenly, his horror intensifies as he sees headlights. A car is barreling straight toward him. It all turns out to be just a terrible nightmare. In reality, William slowly regains consciousness in a hospital after the car accident that also injured his mother. His adoptive father, Richard, a neurologist who has been keeping vigil at his bedside, immediately approaches him. A while later, Dr. Shelley examines William's test results and explains that, fortunately, the accident didn't cause any permanent brain damage. However, she warns that he may continue to experience headaches and even hallucinations. She notes that William is incredibly lucky to have come out of the coma so quickly. As William listens to the doctor, he suddenly catches a fleeting glimpse of that eerie road from his nightmare. Even though his brain appears to be functioning normally, he still can't speak. With a notebook and marker, he scribbles a question to the doctor, asking when he might regain his voice. Dr. Shelley admits that there's no clear answer and suggests his muteness could be an emotional response to the trauma. She hopes that recovery at home might help. Richard soon takes William home, where we learn that he specializes in studying consciousness transfer methods and artificial superintelligence. Richard shows William his new specially equipped room on the first floor and tells him he shouldn't go upstairs. After his unsettling dream, William is eager to see his mother and gestures to ask if she's upstairs. Richard claims she's not feeling well and suggests they wait until tomorrow. Noticing the doubt in William's eyes, Richard repeats that Amelia is asleep and insists that William should get some rest. Over dinner, Richard mentions that William's coma was quite unusual. He often made strange sounds, and his brain activity was as if he were fully conscious. Curious, Richard asks if William remembers seeing anything while he was in the coma. A flash of his mother appears in William's mind, but he stays silent, instead writing down a new question. Is his mother angry with him? Richard assures him that's not the case at all and insists that she just needs to rest. Later that day, William returns to his room, moving slowly with a crutch, but Richard insists he use a wheelchair for the time being. Before leaving, Richard mentions he'll be working upstairs and tells William to call him on the walkie-talkie if he needs anything. As soon as Richard leaves the room, his demeanor changes. Breathing heavily, he heads upstairs while a shadowy figure appears in the hallway. In the middle of the night, William suddenly wakes up and decides to step outside for a smoke to clear his mind. As he lights up, flashes from his nightmare resurface, and he starts coughing. Then he hears the sound of someone digging in the backyard. Curious and unnerved, he goes to investigate and finds his father standing by a large hole in the ground. A hole that looks disturbingly like a grave. The next day, William heads to the kitchen to grab a snack but, weakened, accidentally drops a glass jar that shatters on the floor. Richard immediately rushes in, looking concerned, and reassures William not to worry, saying he'll clean it up himself. Just then, the doorbell rings. Richard hurries to answer it, and William watches as he invites an unfamiliar woman inside and leads her to his office. Puzzled, William slips back outside to the yard, drawn again to the area where his father was digging the night before. He notices worms squirming in the disturbed soil, and glancing up, catches sight of a strange figure in the bedroom window. Defying his father's instructions, William goes upstairs and knocks on his mother's bedroom door, but there's no response. Meanwhile, Richard begins looking for William and eventually finds him locked in the bathroom. Richard asks if he's all right, but William just slides a note under the door asking who the woman that came to the house is. Richard insists she's just a colleague, but William passes him another note demanding to see his mother. Richard, frustrated by his son's persistence, finally promises that she'll join them for dinner, and William reluctantly comes out of the bathroom. That evening, they sit down to eat, but Amelia never joins them. Richard heads upstairs, supposedly to check on her, while William sits alone, fighting off a pounding headache and unsettling visions. Soon, Richard returns and informs him that his mother won't be coming down after all. But by now, William barely hears him, as he's overwhelmed by a sudden intense attack. William collapses to the floor, convulsing violently, until Richard administers a sedative injection, calming his son's thrashing. Later that evening, William rests on the couch with his father, who quietly watches the news, where a report announces another string of missing women. Richard quickly switches off the TV, and once assured that William has drifted to sleep, heads upstairs. In the dead of night, William jolts awake from another terrifying nightmare. The room's light flickers, and he feels a presence. Turning, he's horrified to see his mother, Amelia, standing behind him, naked and covered in scars. Amelia lets out a blood-curdling scream, freezing him with terror. Then her expression shifts to blankness, and she vanishes into the dark hallway. Shaken, William tries to follow her, but his father intercepts him on the stairs, calmly insisting he return to bed. The next day, William occupies himself on the exercise machine, catching glimpses of his father pacing nervously back and forth in the hallway. Without warning, Richard bursts into the yard, laughing hysterically. William, disturbed, approaches and Richard beckons him over. Once again, speaking cryptically about how both he and Amelia need rest to recover, Richard suggests that William make one of his signature dishes, assuring him it would lift Amelia's spirits. Mulling over the idea, William agrees and begins preparing dinner. When it's ready, Richard insists on bringing it upstairs himself, not allowing William to go up to see his mother. Returning to the kitchen, Richard slyly adds a sleeping pill to William's food, encouraging him to eat. By early morning, William wakes from another nightmare, confused and unable to recall when he fell asleep. Sensing Richard's absence from the house, he seizes the opportunity to go upstairs. Reaching Amelia's bedroom, he's horrified to find the room empty, with the untouched meal from the previous night sitting cold on the bedside table. Fury fills him as he realizes his father has been deceiving him. Hearing the front door, William confronts Richard, shoving him and making it clear he knows the truth. Richard shoves back, but William grabs a framed portrait of his mother, demanding answers at last. Richard admits that he's trying to fix what William did to Amelia, implying that the car accident was somehow William's fault. Enraged, William smashes the portrait on the floor and continues knocking over vases, leaving Richard no choice but to speak. That night, Richard steps outside to pour an unknown liquid down the drain, only to turn and see Amelia's eerie, scarred form looming behind him. He mutters that he can't tell their son the truth, fearing the consequences if anyone finds out about his clandestine work. Amelia's expression turns resentful, and she vanishes into the darkness. Resigned, Richard finally decides to reveal his secrets to William. He wakes him and leads him to a hidden door in the pantry, opening it to reveal a narrow staircase leading down to a concealed laboratory in the basement. William, trembling, follows his father, his heart pounding as he descends. When they reach the bottom, he's met with a nightmarish sight. The truth crashes over him like a cold wave. Amelia has been dead all along. Her body is preserved and subjected to Richard's relentless experiments in his futile quest to bring her back to life. Suddenly, the story flashes back to the morning before the accident. William and Richard are on a video call with Amelia, who's preparing to return home from a business trip. With pride, Richard announces that William passed his exams at medical school and can resume his studies after his academic break. Amelia beams with joy, congratulating her son, though he remains distant and expressionless. Rushing to catch her flight, she asks William to pick her up at the airport. After the call ends, Richard chastises William for his lack of direction before returning to his work. William, irritated, heads outside to smoke a joint, his thoughts heavy with frustration and uncertainty. A while later, William wanders into his father's upstairs laboratory and stumbles upon Richard conducting experiments on a rat. Intrigued, William inquires about his father's work, but Richard brushes him off. Reluctantly, William smokes another joint before finally driving to the airport. His mind is clouded and distracted. When he meets Amelia, she immediately senses his distress and asks if he's all right. After a moment's hesitation, William admits he no longer wants to continue his studies, feeling trapped by his father's expectations. Amelia reassures him, reminding him that he passed his exams, which proves he has what it takes to succeed. However, William, with a tense voice, confesses that he didn't even complete his final project and suspects his father pulled strings to help him pass. Amelia tries to ease his worries, suggesting he could stop his studies if they're making him miserable, and promises to talk to Richard about it. On the way home, fatigue begins to overcome William. His eyes grow heavy, and he struggles to stay focused on the road. Just as his eyelids flutter shut for a second too long, he loses control and collides with an oncoming car. In the present, William regains his ability to speak. Richard suggests his son take medicine and rest to recover from the shock, reassuring him that Amelia will recover soon, though he doesn't explain how. Overwhelmed with emotions, William struggles to cope, so his father takes him to Dr. Shell at a clinic. Dr. Shell is pleased to hear William is finally speaking, though she notices his gloomy mood. When she asks if everything is okay, William deflects, blaming his sadness on a migraine. Afterward, they head home, but Richard stops at the accident scene and reveals he knows William smoked weed that day. Richard explains Amelia passed away at that very spot. He goes on to reveal that while doctors placed her in a medically induced coma after the accident, it didn't help, so he brought her body home. William finds it strange his father keeps Amelia's lifeless body at home, but Richard insists she is still alive. He explains the most important part of a person is their consciousness, and he's found a way to preserve it. What William sees is merely a shell, but Richard is confident he can transfer her consciousness into another body. Finding the right woman is difficult, and time is running out. William realizes the woman who had been visiting his father was intended to be Amelia's new body. Though horrified at first, William starts to understand. If the experiment succeeds, he could speak to his mother again and ask for her forgiveness. As they approach home, William begins to support his father's experiments. He enters the lab and looks at Amelia's mutilated body, apologizing to her. Suddenly, he notices a terrifying spider crawling out of Amelia's ear. The next day, William overhears Richard inviting a new victim, Marta, into their home. Marta notices William and later expresses surprise that Richard never mentioned he had a son. Richard pours Marta a drink, secretly lacing it with sleeping pills. Soon, she loses consciousness. Father and son chain Marta to a chair next to Amelia. Richard attaches sensors to Amelia's temples and drills a hole in her head to begin the consciousness transfer. The lab lights flicker before going out. The computer confirms the transfer was successful, and Marta regains consciousness. However, Marta begins acting erratically, begging to be let go. Her condition worsens, and William watches in horror as his father's grotesque experiment ends in failure. Marta doesn't survive, and a shaken William retreats to his room. Richard reassures William they are on the brink of a breakthrough, insisting Amelia briefly came back to life in Marta's body. William doesn't believe him, accusing his father of taking an innocent life. Determined, Richard preserves Amelia's body for future attempts. Later, Richard suggests William cope by mocking his troubles and bursts into maniacal laughter. Though confused, William reluctantly joins in. That night, William watches a news report about Marta, who has been reported missing. Overwhelmed with guilt and fear, he spirals into another nightmare. The next day, William secretly uncovers a buried body in the yard, realizing the full extent of his father's experiments. Richard catches him, but William escapes with the car. Driving away, he hallucinates Amelia's mutilated form in the road. Frozen in terror, he's caught by Richard, who begins choking him but stops when he senses Amelia disapproves. Richard calls Dr. Shell to check on William. As she prepares to leave, she hears a noise upstairs. Investigating, she nearly collides with a terrified William, who calls the police, claiming his father is killing people. Richard dismisses this as delusional, but when he attacks Dr. Shell, William defends her. Richard sedates Dr. Shell and prepares her for the next transfer attempt. A struggle ensues between father and son. Wounded, William gathers the strength to strike his father in the neck with a scalpel. Both father and son collapse, but Dr. Shell awakens. To William's shock, Amelia's consciousness has successfully transferred into Dr. Shell. Tragically, neither Richard nor William lives to see it. So would you go as far as conducting experiments to save a loved one? Or is such cruelty unjustifiable? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I will have the same initial plan of transferring the consciousness, but I will at least create a clone using her DNA. If he has the means to transfer consciousness, he can definitely clone a replica of her original self. Okay, until next time with a mind-boggling sci-fi mix film.